Detailing miniature wargame terrain, tweaking the basics for improved appearance. Wargame terrain basics. Here are just a few terrain details which need to be observed. Terrain items like miniature figures must be portable and storage friendly. For instance, imagine the difficulty in finding storage trays for units of pike or phalanx infantry where the models have long, that is to say tall, spears. A terrain item must be spontaneously changeable. The location of a field's gate in a stone wall may not be important to show, but where associated buildings may interrupt that fence line can influence the item's location and shape on the game table. A completed item may comprise separate parts. A river, for instance, may comprise common bank details such as boulders and bushes, and a field may consist of the fence line itself plus the fabric that represents the type of field. Permanent glues or adhesives must be avoided either onto the game surface or onto other items. Weather independent. Terrain must be as season neutral as possible other than the basic color texture of the table surface and varieties of colors of trees. Common issues with wargame terrain, page 1. Here are just a few common issues with most miniature wargame terrain. Time-space distortion. This is a visual phenomenon exhibited by the use of terrain that attempts to match the scale of the figures. This is caused by the mistaken assumption by manufacturers that buildings and bridges must match the scale of the figures being used. On the game table with the figures, a house may look very nice, but in reality the space it occupies should be far smaller than a battalion of infantry represents. In many cases, terrain size may not have to follow the scale of the figures being used. This is also true with the width of roads and rivers. In reality, roads and rivers would be extremely narrow in comparison to the size of a stand of infantry on the game table. Endurance. Almost all terrain is manufactured from lightweight products such as paper, plastic, and foam. In most cases, trees are manufactured in pieces, and once assembled, over time they will lose structural integrity. The value of attaching trees to cardboard bases is debatable, though this does vastly speed up the time in setting up a game. Common issues with wargame terrain, page 2. Hill slopes. This is the most common issue with creating combat scenarios, mainly because of the slope of hills cannot possibly exhibit the reality of actual physical slopes of actual battles, and this is due to modeling technology. Wargame and model technology does not yet provide a method for simulating gradual slope terrain and rolling countryside, although the best solution is the use of a sand table. However, the sandbox concept is by no means within the grasp of even a small portion of the wargaming public because of weight and the obvious fact that it entails the use of sand. The result of this is that most all model hills have dramatic and sharp slopes from 45 to 60 degrees, if at all. The challenge that this poses is back to that old problem: roads. In cases where roads must be shown going up a slope, the size and angle of the slope poses a problem, and the road material itself must now be more flexible in order to negotiate the slope. So we may suggest not trying to shape the road to the hill and simply paint the road on the slope if at all possible. After the game, simply paint over the road, and this implies the hills must be, of course, paintable. In some cases, however, rubber river material can also be used for roads, and this might be an option. However, rubber material has its own limitations as well. Common issues with wargame terrain 3. Textiles, textures and textiles. This subject regards the desire of bringing more realism to the game table surface to keep it from looking too smooth, too static, and too uniform in appearance. The use of a textured material such as cloth or the application of a synthetic sand-type material added to paint, which might then be applied to the game surface, can create the illusion of ground effectively, but remember, figures in the game are glued to various base materials such as cardstock, wood, metal, or plastic, and the pieces exist on top of this texture, so the texture cannot be too extreme. On a paper or vinyl surface, perhaps with a digitized image for the ground or a variety of colors, the game pieces can slide effectively, but some tactile feel of the battle surface will be lost. In addition, vinyl has that shine or wet look. Fabrics such as felt should be avoided because these kinds of cloth degrade over time unless treated, and their woven nature clings to the base bottoms, making it difficult to move pieces without constantly picking them up from the surface. Various corrugated papers and cloth can be used to represent different kinds of fields, from plowed to grass, wheat, and meadows. to Wargames with Miniatures from Imaginative Multimedia. I'm Terry Kback. Talk about multimedia. This is an interesting product, fascinating, and I'm really glad to have discovered it. This is the way the product comes delivered. These are strips of very thin type of a rubber material, but you can take right out of the box and put onto your Wargame table. They're ready-made, flocked and everything, and it's extraordinary. I am impressed. This is the way it comes packaged. They're wrapped in tissue paper, and I believe they're even green tissue paper. So anyway, this is the way it comes, extremely professional. I gotta tell you, this is very cool. And so they're ready to be put right into the Wargame table, and I've got one set up, and we're gonna try and match up the shapes that I've provided to our terrain of sloped hills, and well, let's have a look. Okay, what we're looking at here is the portion of the Wargame table where we've got these strips put in place. As you can see, it's a very thin rubber material and very flexible. It's literally like a rubberized paper. I really have to hand it to their manufacturing. It's a very good job. You can see that there's flocking on it. It is not molded flocking. This is actual flocking that's been added, and including little pieces of stone and bushes and so on that have been added. So what I'm going to do is literally use this as a template, this layout as a template for a normal curve that's going to be in the river. Now what I'm going to do this is I've got the S curve in place. You can see it right here. Get out of this light. Okay, you see the S curve I've got in place, and I'll zoom in on more of that in a minute, but what I'm going to show is how I'm going to create the curve, and then I'm going to cut it with a scissors. So I'm going to match it up as good as I can, pretty good there, and you see that I've got some pencil line already drawn. There's going to be a little bit of cutting necessary to get this to match up to his piece, which is just here, and I'm matching it with the end of the table here, so that we've got basically a 45-degree bend that I've penciled out, and I'm going to cut it with the scissors and match it up. Okay, what we're looking at here is the S curve that's provided in the choices available, and as you can see, I'll just peel it right up, and there is the S. Get in the shot, Terry. There is the S curve. It is absolutely the coolest river section, and the roads, I'm positive, are going to be exactly the same effectiveness. This is really quite an extraordinary deal. Could we have shopped around for eons to find the same material and done it ourselves? Sure, but why? Because this stuff is ready to go, and I can't tell you how impressed I am. Well, I'm attempting to show you how impressed I am. Now, what we see here is I'm trying to match it up to the curve of our sloped hill that we've got. And that's the bird in the background. He's going to try and get in as much as he can here. So, in this particular case, bird, thank you, bird, thank you. All right, close the door. What I'm going to do here is debate whether or not I should make a proper curve or just go ahead and slice that so it fits. It's hard to say because I don't want to affect this other straight section here. Robot cam, please move. Okay. And I'll go over the other pieces that are supplied as well, but I'm not sure if I want to cut that or leave it the way it is, or cut this other straight section to conform instead of cutting the curve. I almost just want to trim that a little bit. I hesitate because it's going to permanently alter that flat to a somewhat 30-degree cut to make it match up. I hesitate to do that, so I'm considering what to do. Let's start from the scratch. That's the way it looks. You see there's a gap there. I suppose in the curve section over here that I'm going to be cutting, I could cut another curve to put in here. But I can see right away that having little strips might be an issue. So the decision will have to be made to actually, and to avoid that little tiny piece that's missing there, either cut this to shape this or cut this to conform to the straight, which is to say moving the shape on top, and then actually perhaps I don't need to. Perhaps that's acceptable. And I think that's acceptable. So we have one seam that might be risen a little bit. We can put down with double-sided tape. And again, the reason I'm saying this is that I don't want to have to make a permanent difference to this strip. So I think I'm going to leave it like that and let the chips fall where they may. I think that's still better in any regard to the foamies we were using, and although the foamies are vastly less expensive, the fact is the appearance here is extraordinary. Okay, what we see here is our scene entails a river coming down a hillside, and just as the website mentioned, the river material conforms to that slope. You can see it right here. Very nice. Again, possibility of tacking it down with sticky tack or double-sided tape. Regardless, here's our ancient history Bologna Bridge, vacuum formed. We're still using these after all these years. I put the piece of river in place, and we see the gap is perfect. It's absolutely a perfect marriage. You couldn't ask for anything better than that. Perhaps a little bit less bright. Okay, there we go. It's just absolutely extraordinary. Now, in trying to match up with, we've resolved this over here. Robot cam, please. Okay, we've resolved not to do anything permanent here by cutting. We'll leave it as it is. Coming back, we're seeing the intersection here of the two rivers. Now, again, what could be done here is I could move this a smidge, take off that piece of flocking, and perhaps just leave it lay combined in that manner without doing any damage permanent wise, except for the removal of that flocking. I could just simply make this a 90-degree mate, or using another piece perhaps avoid having to move that flocking. So I'll grab another piece, put it in the same spot that we had already determined, overlap them again, and here we see a pretty darn close approximation with maybe a little piece of flocking that has to be removed, and no permanent damage needs to be done. Perhaps, there we go, perhaps that would be acceptable. So there we go. It's a 90-degree, I understand, but I'll show you that piece I just grabbed in a minute. Okay, there we see another piece being readied to match up, and now I'm just going to go like this and match it up. Again, what we're trying to avoid is permanent alteration of the pieces. So we've got something there that, you know, in a quick pinch is acceptable. And I really can't say that altering those pieces in any way by cutting them is necessary. Now, if we actually were to go further, let's move the camera manually. Down here, we see the other issue coming up. Okay. We see another S-curve, the end of another S-curve, and we see our straight section right here, and the one end of the S-curve that we've got, two S-curves, I believe, right here. So what we are wanting to do is match these up to match our already established hill terrain. Now, another method we might be able to accomplish would be to change the angle of that river at this, let's go back, robot, please, back to where you were. Okay, let's see, maybe if we hold that point and pivot the river, does it give us enough play? And it looks like it does, to attempt to reach an angle, again, being an acceptable compromise to get those pieces to match up. Now what I'm going to do is reach for that S-curve and pull it a little bit and see if that is also going to be an issue. And again, I stress I don't want to alter these pieces in any way. We're attempting to conform it, and I'll get that tree out of the way, to our hill. Now, as you can see, the river, as the S-curve has gone up onto the hill a little bit, so we may have to make a sacrifice of this S-curve, meaning that we may have to scribe it right here and cut it so that the other piece, which you see right here, let me reach, is going to match up like that. So we may, in fact, rather than, again, alter too much, just perhaps cutting this piece right there, which creates an, or perhaps cutting the S-curve directly in half. Let me zoom in and see if we can get a detail on that. Cutting the S-curve instead of, well, we could cut that S-curve right there before it begins to bend again. And in that way, I'm sure everybody watching this is saying, Terry, you don't have to do that, you can do something else. I'm sure that options are available, but at this moment during this videotaping, probably best to just go ahead and make this permanent cut right here. So it becomes a permanent curve, although that's a little too close. More like that, which I think is probably a good idea. Again, it means no permanent damage was done to any but the one piece here, which is good because we'll need it anyway, and then back over here, the other small curve that we were talking about earlier. So I don't know, I think perhaps I'll scribe that and we'll cut that as well. What I just did here was I moved this piece that way, and now I'm going to make an actual proper curve out of this by creating well, first I'm going to determine that that's probably going to be a good spot for this curve to exist. And I'll make this cut right here, which looks to be a straight, average, and reusable format. Like that. I think that looks like about a pretty good normal, reusable is what I mean by normal. Generic, we could say. So I'm going to cut that piece right there, match these two up, no problem. And then, having done our little maneuver over here, probably, see, it's all about compromise. But compromise in such a way that the shapes are reusable enough. So let's try that. That looks like a pretty good compromise. Okay, here we are, about to make this cut. The reason I'm going to agree with this is because I recognize both of these shapes, these angles. I've used them routinely, repetitively, and I don't have any issues about cutting this. You can see that it cuts just like butter, like butter. It's a dream. Absolute dream come true. So, back again to what we were doing with this. Zooming out, panning up. It's like a cookbook. Okay. Going back to our marriage that's going to happen here, which was, good Lord, now I've forgotten. There we are. Right? Okay, there we go. We'll be a little bit more. Okay. Perfect. Now, this is a good example of what you can see the differences. The seam is practically invisible. I mean, it's just absolutely gorgeous. So we're left with a little bit of a need right here, which, you know, we could replicate with another piece of the material, a different material. We could replicate it in some way so that we don't have to, again, destroy another piece. But the fact remains that, well, we do have the option of cutting this big curve here, which I think is what we're going to do, because I know I'm going to use that piece down here. I'm going to cut that. I'll show that as well. I haven't actually done that yet. I'll show it now. Where are we? There we are. Okay, yes. See my scribe? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that. Here was the original curve. It was a big 90 degree. And we're going to take that and do it again, just here. So, making another, what appears to be a generic shape to get that angle that we need. Well, let's do it this way. Okay, there's our curve in place. We're going to overlap to know where we should scribe, and there's our scribe just there. So that, again, I recognize this as a typical shape. No offense, flocking was a good idea, but if I was going to make a suggestion, I would probably say, you know what, leave the bushes off. Okay, now we're going to remove it and then cut that line. There we see my scattered terrain from the excitement of getting this thing in place. But essentially, the flow is quite a deal. Over there, we see that I haven't done that little corner there, but I'll do that now. I've already cut the piece as we saw. There it is. Right. Excellent. Extraordinary. Very super. We've got this remaining piece here. Probably going to leave it because of the fact that, as a matter of fact, maybe I'll just put it right up in there. Anyway, the meeting that's going on here, again, on camera, perfect. And over here, seemed a little bit, again, easier to see on camera than in real life. And there we've got another Bologna bridge, as we will put down there as well, in place. But here we go. Coming off the hill, we've got a marriage good enough here. Again, it's giving us a possibility. All I need to do was cut this to match up to my piece underneath, which, as a matter of fact, I may in fact do. Because that is, well, that's a possibility. That's a possibility. But I like the way this works without any further cutting, and I'm going to leave that for a minute.